Hi, I'm Kate Smith. I'm Research Fellow on the East India Company at Home project here at the University College London. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the aspects of the project, the houses that we're looking at, particularly the country houses we're looking at. So the project is thinking about the ways in which the East India Company shaped the British country house. So we're re-examining the country house in a more imperial and global context. One of the case studies that I've been working on is Warfield Park in Berkshire. And in the 18th century, Berkshire was known as the English Hindustan because so many East India Company officials and their families, when they returned to England, went and moved to Berkshire and bought country houses there. And they did so mainly because they were trying to re-establish themselves within English society, and a lot of them became members of Parliament and wanted easy access to London, so Berkshire really offered them that. And also what we're finding is that because so many of them were there, they could really rely on these networks that they'd already established out in India. So Warfield Park was the home of John Walsh, and he had worked previously, before he came back to England, as private secretary to Clive. In 1764, he purchased Warfield Park, which was an incredible country house in Berkshire, and it's no longer standing. Unfortunately, it was demolished like a lot of other country houses in 1955. And in that year, there was a country house being demolished every 5 days. That gives you some idea of how important that year was. And Warfield was a part of that. But Warfield is an interesting example because we don't really have that much evidence of objects returning with Walsh or the objects that he put into the house. But what we do know is about the way in which he changed the physical quality of the house through the fortune that he'd made in India. Unfortunately, in 1766, the whole house burnt down, but Walsh was clearly very invested in the house. It clearly meant a lot to him, and he rebuilt it completely. Other members of his family also became very attached to Warfield Park, and it's interesting that this is another way in which the East India Company shaped the country house. They did it because when they went to India, they often longed for these country houses that had been set up by other members of their family. So, for example, Walsh's niece, Margaret Falk, went out to India in the 1770s, and when she was out there, she longed for Warfield. She talked about the changes that Walsh was making. He was clearly writing about it to his niece and describing the many changes that he was making to the house. And when she returned to Warfield, and eventually she inherited it in 1795 when Walsh died. And her husband, John Ben Walsh, who was also an East India Company official, they again renovated the house. In the 1810s, they rebuilt it, they made it bigger, they made it more of a family house. So what's interesting about the Warfield Park case study is that it shows how a house has been shaped by the East India Company, not just by one generation, but by many. And it was not just their fortunes that were changing the house and the physical aspect of the house, it was also the imaginative attachments that they'd created with the house at that time. Berkshire isn't the only county we're looking at, obviously. We're also looking at houses on the borders of Scotland, in Wales, and in North Yorkshire, where Helen Clifford's research has found that it's not just the one house that's important for a family, it's the whole network of houses that they inhabit and use.